Matthew chapter 8, starting in verse 5, and we'll get there here in just a second. What I want us to look at today is it's almost a little bit backwards from the way that I would typically approach it. I love sometimes just grabbing encounters, you probably have noticed this, of Jesus interacting with people and looking at what he said and what he did and what he taught and how he treated them, because it teaches us as Christ followers what to do and what to teach and how to treat people and all of that, and how to respond with true compassion and grace, and to stand up for things with true strength and in truth. So I like to do that. But what I want to do this week is actually to flip that just a little bit, or maybe completely. And instead of looking at how those people encountered Jesus, I want to look today at what Jesus saw when he was watching, when he was listening to other people. What impressed Jesus? What made Jesus stand back and say, wow, now that's impressive? You would think that for the creator of the world that would be impossible, to surprise him, to wow him, to impress him, but it's not. It's not. Even having made everything, and you may think I'm talking about God the Father, but I'm still also talking about Jesus. Colossians 1, everything God chose to make, God chose to make through Jesus Christ. So Jesus himself was a part of Genesis 1. Creation of the sun, the moon, the stars, the billions of galaxies that we now are able to see, those were all made through him, by him, and for him. Colossians 1. It would be hard to impress somebody like that, wouldn't it? It's almost as bad as trying to bake a pie for your own grandmother. Would you do that? I would not do that, okay? My grandmothers were great cooks, and I don't think I'd put mine on the line and say, well, now try that, and think I was going to impress my grandmothers, okay? I don't think if I were going to go out, and I've got some repairs to do on my shed, and if I were going to go out and do those repairs in the shed, I don't think I would then go get my grandfather and say, oh, look at that, because my grandfather would do a better job. But you do what you do. It feels like that when you try to please God, even just to please God, much less the concept of doing something so well that Jesus stands back and says, well, look at that. But Jesus did that several times, actually, not just a few. We're only going to look at a few. But as I got to looking, you could put together nearly a dozen times where Jesus says, now that, I want you to look at that. That's the way it's supposed to be. That's impressive. And so I want to look at a few that I pulled from that I think are representative of almost all of those different interactions he had, so that I can challenge myself and challenge you along with myself to look at that and try and step up our game in terms of living a life where Jesus says, now that I like. Because that's really what it's all about, isn't it? Not out of guilt. None of that's out of guilt or law. All of this comes out of love. Gratitude to God for what he's done. Some of these people, they did this before he'd even done. So how much more should we be like they were, knowing what he's done, what he's accomplished, what he's sacrificed for us, that they didn't even know yet? So the first one is in Matthew chapter 8. And we look at this most of the time as a matter of looking at the miracle that Jesus did. But again, I want to look and see, well, what did Jesus see that day? So let's read this. And as we're reading it, try and put yourself not in the place of the person coming for help, the centurion, but in the place of Jesus himself. When he had entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. And he said to him, I will come and heal him. But the centurion replied, Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who followed him, truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. I tell you, many will come from east and west and recline at table with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness, in that place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And to the centurion, Jesus said, Go, let it be done for you as you have believed. And the servant was healed at that very moment. Again, incredible what happens. Jesus, for instance, showing his mastery not just over death and disease and all of that, but his mastery over space and time. It is nothing for him. The distance between us and those billions of galaxies that were created through him, all of that is nothing for him. And so for him to heal somebody in another zip code, that's what he does. It's just what he does. It's who he is. It's what he can do. That's what usually impresses us most, but that wasn't what impressed Jesus most. And Matthew writes this down on purpose that we will see this. Look at the word he uses. He says that Jesus marveled at the attitude and the faith of this centurion. Marveled. When I think of marveled, I think of being somewhere like the Grand Canyon, which I haven't gotten to do yet, or somewhere like Yosemite, which I've done, and that alone is enough. Where you just stand there and you hear in your head without even trying the verses of how great thou art, because God's power, and this is just something that he made the way you would go to a pottery class or a carpentry class or a woodshop class in high school and make. It's the same difference, only he would be the teacher, already had the skills. This is not something that was hard for him, but I marvel. It's the same thing that when you have children and you're there in the hospital and for the first time they hand you your baby, you marvel. There's worship that happens in those delivery rooms. Congratulations, by the way, I saw that. Rachel's going to have a baby. But those things are incredible, and we truly stand in awe of God's power. And he uses the same word for Jesus observing true humility. Faith and humility. He looks at this man who says about himself, I can order people around, but you shouldn't even come to my house. It's not good enough. I'm not good enough. I am unworthy. And Jesus marvels. It's like he takes a step back and says, and he starts talking to everybody else around him. You know what? There's going to be people come all over the place. Some of them are going to make it into the kingdom of heaven, and some of them aren't. Some of them are going to go into punishment. But look at this guy. Almost as if to say, and where do you think he'll be? You think you're all righteous and saved, he says to the crowd around him. But this right here, we know where he's going. Why? Because he looks at his faith and his humility. You want to impress God, which seems an impossible thing to do. How do you do it? Well, we build great big buildings. We do all these wonderful things. I'm going to put together a Christian resume that'll make Jesus go, I should have been a Christian like you. No. How does it happen? That might shock Jesus, but not in the way that you want to be shocked. He talked about those people right down here, verse 12. It wasn't good. How do you impress Jesus? Humility. Because God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. This man, genuine humility, which you might think was impossible for a Roman centurion, impressed him. So, how about us? Where is our heart? Where is our attitude? And where is our humility? That we go before God, not with demands, not with entitlement. He doesn't go to Jesus with entitlement. And yet you look, our culture is so full of entitlement. And it doesn't matter what class you are or circumstance you are, it's all over the place. There are people who have nothing and they feel entitled to have what you have. There are people who have everything and they feel entitled to have what you have too. They call that Washington and Congress, right? They keep trying to get what you've got. Everybody wants what everybody else have because they feel more entitled to it than you. We sometimes go to God entitled. You want to sell a Christian book? Write it from the vantage point of being entitled to God. God, you must give me. God, you promised. I demand that you give it to me. I step out there and tell you, you will give it to me. Those books sell because the author wants your money too. He's entitled to it. Those books sell, but they don't convince Jesus. What convinced Jesus was a man who said, you know what? I don't deserve even to be here talking to you, but I know you're the one. I know you're the one who can do this. I know you're the one who can help. And on top of that, nothing he asked for was for himself. Like in James, when he says, why don't you have? Why didn't you get what you thought you were entitled to? He said, because you were being so selfish. You just wanted it for yourself. This guy, not even about him. None of it is about him. Help my servant. Somebody that some Roman centurions wouldn't even have cared for. Oh, you broke your leg? Well, get out there with the horse. I'm about to shoot too. And it wasn't that attitude at all. It was entirely a selfless attitude. So that's one. Faith and a deep humility. Jesus to marvel, not just be impressed, to marvel. Okay, that's one. The second one is not very far over, Matthew chapter 15. Let's go look over there. In chapter 15, he comes across this woman who is begging for help for her daughter. Her daughter is demon-possessed, evil spirits. I don't know what that's like. Some of you, I've seen your kids, you do know what that's like. No, I'm kidding with you. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. All the kids I thought of are actually adults, so if that helps any of you with young kids. Anyway, she has this child, and I can't imagine how helpless that would be. It's bad enough if your kid has an injury, has a disease, has some problem, a social problem that you can't figure out how to deal with. Depression, evil spirits, things like that. I don't know. That's way above what I can imagine. But that's what she's dealing with. On top of that, she's a Gentile, and she knows it, right? She knows that she's not entitled to anything that Jesus has to offer. But she knows that he's the Messiah, and she's going to ask anyway. She knows he's the one that she needs to go to. Verse 21 of Matthew 15. Again, try and look at it from Jesus' point of view. Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon." But he didn't answer her a word. And his disciples came and begged him, saying, "Send her away. She's crying after us." Isn't that something? They came and they begged. And it sounds like, if you're not familiar with the story, they came and they begged, "Jesus, come on, aren't you going to pay attention to her?" No. That's not their attitude at all. Their attitude is, "Jesus, can you get rid of her? She's making too much racket, and we're getting rid of it." Nice. I'm not talking about big D disciples, but little D disciples like us. Sometimes this get it. And they weren't getting it that day. Verse 24, he answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." And she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." And he answered, "It is not right to take the children's bread and give it and throw it to the dogs." And she said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire." And her daughter was healed instantly. Do I need to? You having trouble? Okay. This woman, if we look at her, is just a desperate mom. She's got a daughter who is not just sick. She is demon-possessed, being hounded by a demon. We don't know all the situation or what that meant and how it manifested itself. Some of the other cases in the Gospels that resulted in some of the people who were possessed and hounded by demons trying to kill themselves. That happens to the man who was in the cemetery. That happens to the man who brought his young boy to Jesus and needed both help and faith. In all those circumstances, it was devastating to the child, devastating to the person who was being hounded, and devastating to everybody around them. And this woman hears about Jesus and clearly believes. She doesn't address him as just, some guy that other people said might help. She calls him Lord and the Son of David. This is a confession that she believes he is the Son of God, the promised Messiah, the one who would come and reign on David's throne. She knew her Old Testament, some of those people who taught it at the temple every day and called themselves believers. This is what Jesus saw as she spoke. Now, why does he put her off at first? Because he was being obedient to the covenant that he had with Israel. It was by the covenant that he had to go to Israel first. Go read about that in Romans chapter 1. He had to do that. She then pleads with him. I get it. She doesn't feel entitled. She's not saying, oh, who cares about that? She doesn't say that. She says, I get it. I'm not asking for the whole meal. I'm not asking for everything Israel gets. All I need is this one crumb. I need my daughter healed. And Jesus says what? Look back at what he says. Verse 26. He says it's not right to take from the children's bread. And she says, yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat crumbs that fall from the master's table. And Jesus answered, oh, woman, how great is your faith. I don't know the tone he said that with, but I doubt he said it in Sunday school tone. Oh, woman, how great. With the same kind of awe that he responded with when the centurion said what he did. Woman, your faith is incredible. That is great. You've got it. You go home. Your daughter's well. You're getting everything you just asked for. Why? Faith. And something else we don't talk about, but we need to. Tenacity. She was not letting go. She knew what God could do. She knew who Jesus was, and she knew the depth of love for her daughter. And she could not let go. We have a world right now that is so confused. A world is so caught in they're being hounded by demons, if we want to be real honest about it. And there's evil in the world, and there's fighting in the world, and there's hatred in the world, and there's just mass confusion in the world about what's right and what's wrong. And God's people, God's people, have two reactions to choose from. We can learn to hate the world that's around us and write them off and say good riddance. Or we can be as tenacious as this woman was for her own daughter, and we can love and fight for spiritually and stand up for spiritually and plead with our God to open eyes and open hearts and change lives with the same tenacity that she had. We can love the people around us the way that Jesus loved them so much that not only do we not learn to hate, but we don't do what I think is even worse than hatred, that we don't become just indifferent. Well, the world's just going to be the world, which is essentially so they can go to hell. We have to be people that love with a tenacity that doesn't let go, that plead and pray and beg the Lord, open their heart and open their eyes, and understand that that opening of the heart and opening of the eyes is going to involve us. This woman did not stay home and say, well, I hope that the Lord does this. This woman went to him and spoke to him face to face and pleaded for her daughter's life. And Jesus says, how great is your faith? When will Jesus say, how great is the faith of the church in 2024? When it is as bulldog tenacious about saving the people around us, fighting spiritually for our sons and daughters, fighting for your granddaughters and grandsons, fighting for your neighbors, going to the Lord constantly to open their heart, to open their eyes, to open their mind to His grace. They're being hounded, Lord. Help them, Lord. How great would it be to see a church on fire, to plead with God for every last son and daughter of the earth. That's what He's calling for. That makes Jesus back and go, that's the church I wanted right there. The one that never, ever lets go. I want to look at one last picture. This woman we know well, the widow and her two mites, right? This is over in Luke chapter 21. Whoops. Short, 4 little verses. But what an impact this lady has had on the history of Christianity. Jesus looked up, again, look through His eyes. Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the offering box. And He saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. And He said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. So kind of picture yourself at the temple courts and inside the court of women, which, everybody could go that far, but the women could only go that far. And then there were courts beyond that they couldn't go. In the court of women, where both of the men and women would have had access, were these things that they called trumpets, and they were kind of trumpet-shaped. I ended up finding a picture. And you cannot see that very well, but it's great up here on my monitor. There are these, I think bronze, I can't remember, trumpet-shaped receptacles, bins, offering bins, sort of thing. And they would put them in there. There were 13 of them, I understand, and the first several had particular purposes. They all had particular purposes, so you knew what you were giving to when you did it. And so some were required by the law of Moses. They had to give so much for the temple to be able to maintain that so that the priests could eat, all that kind of stuff, take care of business, all those kinds of things, administrative, everything, just like now. All that was a few of them. And then you get to the last ones, and the last ones are the ones that were not required by law, but were about your generosity. And when Jesus talks about the rich who are coming and giving out of their abundance, and He says the rich are putting in their gifts in the offering box, but I lost my whole control of my tongue there for a second. He saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins, and He said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more. They give out of their abundance. We also read where Jesus talks about people who would give at the temple at times, and we read it like they were playing or blasting their trumpets, and that's not actually what that means. It means that when they gave their coins into these trumpets, they made sure that it made the noise. We don't do that anymore. I guess maybe it's possible in some churches that you might have some people swipe their debit card and it tells you to remove your card. Don't you love that sound? How many of you race when you're at Walmart, Dollar General, wherever, to get your card out before it goes bing, 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 and tells you to take your card out? You know what I'm talking about? If I worked as a cashier, I would be so tired of that little ding to remove your debit card out of the thing. Anyway, they would do that on purpose, make noise so that everybody knows, look what I'm giving. Broadcast their generosity, okay? Not this lady. We only know about her for one reason. Jesus noticed. That's it. That's the only reason we know. Jesus saw her. And what does He see? Here is a woman who is giving, and it's at one of those trumpets that would have been for the poor and or the education of children, the last few. Historians believe this is the part of the court where He saw this. So not required by law, but driven by love. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. You known people like that? That even down to their last 2 coins, they're thinking about somebody else. Who else needs even these more than I do? I've told you all about a lady. I can't remember how long it's been, so I'm going to assume that it's past the expiration and I can tell it again. There was a lady named Marcel. This is who she was. People would give her money because she was very poor. She never saw herself that way. She was very poor. She lived in upstate New York. I met her in the winter. Somebody had given her money for boots. And they were talking about they were going to have to give money for boots again because she found somebody who was colder than she was. So she gave her boots. And so people would gladly give her new boots because they knew she's not wasting them. She's not losing them. She's not wearing them out too fast. If you gave her boots and she doesn't have any, it's because somebody else needed them too. She was this woman. That impresses Jesus. He says, you see all these people just clang, 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 clang into the plate? He said, that doesn't impress me. You know what impresses me? This woman, who out of her poverty gave all she had. Paul was impressed by the same thing. I think Jesus impressed by the same thing by extension. In 2 Corinthians chapter 8, Paul writes this, we want you to know, brothers, about the grace of that God is... Let me start over. We want you to know, brothers, about the grace of God that has been given among the churches of Macedonia. For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means, of their own accord, begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. So get this. Paul is writing to the church at Corinth, which was the wealthy church. Okay? So let's do a comparison. Right now, people at Austin Avenue are nervous. I'm going to say them. I'm not. Here we are in Early, and Paul is writing to, let's say, Highland over in Abilene. They were in that article about the insurance too. It didn't. They had a rough time. But he's writing to Highland, and he's saying, Highland, you guys be sure and remember that you promised to give to this, because here's this little old church over in Early, and they don't have nearly the resources that you have, but look what they're doing. Look at how many people they're helping. Look at what they're giving, and look at what they're able to accomplish. And they're actually still got their eyes open, looking for new opportunities. And they wrote me and said, hey, can we help you with that? That's what Paul says. He says that they begged. He uses the word begged. They begged for the opportunity to be able to help in an effort where bigger, richer churches should have been stepping up. That happens a lot. You see this missions thing up here? I don't know what the numbers are now. I have no idea. But 30 years ago, 30 years ago. 30 years ago, it was common knowledge that 80% of Church of Christ mission works were supported by churches of 200 people and under. Not the Highlands, not the Hills, not Oak Hills, places like Early. That was true 30 years ago. I'd bet you my lunch it's true today, if not more so. It was true then. They begged. Now look at what he says, because this is really quite cool. I say this, verse 8, not as a command, but to prove by the earnestness of others that your love is also genuine. He's not pounding on Corinth. He's saying, I believe your love is genuine. You know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake became poor, so that you by his poverty might become rich. And in this matter I give my judgment. This benefits you. I give my judgment. This benefits you, who a year ago started not only to do this work, but also to desire to do it. Now, finish doing it as well, so that your readiness in desiring it may be matched by your completing it out of what you have. For if the readiness is there, it is acceptable according to what a person has, not according to what he does not have. For I do not mean that others should be eased and you burdened, but that as a matter of fairness, your abundance at the present time should supply their need, so that their abundance may supply your need, and that there may be fairness, as it is written, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. You know, we fit both sides of this equation, don't we? We're the small church by American standards. We're the wealthy church by the world's standards. And God calls us at both sides of that seesaw, doesn't he? calls us to live higher and to be people like this woman, whose heart and soul is beyond herself, no matter what the circumstances may be, no matter what changes, no matter what is and isn't there. And he tells the church at Corinth, it's not about what is and isn't there in terms of numbers. It's about what is and isn't there in terms of our heart and our sacrifice and our love for the people around us and our love for the Lord. And Jesus looks at this woman and says, now look at that. All three of these people impressed him. Jesus marveled at their faith, their humility, their tenacity, and their generosity. In the words of the captain of the submarine, Red October, and he'll marvel again. Okay? That's my favorite line, okay? The world trembled at the sound of our rockets. You know, I love that line. Now, the world can tremble at the sound of faith, the sound of humility in a church that doesn't give up, Christians who never give up, Christians who always, always love and serve and give and honor God in all that they do. Let's pray together.